Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Today, our guest is Jennie Nash. Jennie has worked in the publishing industry, written for publications like the New York Times and GQ, and is the author of 7 books. But she gave up her writing career a few years ago to become a book coach. And today we're going to hear Jennie's story and learn about what a book coach is and what one can do for you. Jennie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you because book coaching is something I think most people have not heard of. In fact, I didn't even really know what a book coach was. And I started looking into it and I realized, well, that's kind of what I do. And it's kind of what some other people I know do. But I would love to learn more about your book coaching program and how you train book coaches. But first, before we get to that, tell us a little bit about yourself and your history and your background and how you became a writer and then how you morphed into this book coaching.
Yeah, well, you mentioned at the start that I've been in the world of publishing for more than 30 years. My first job out of college was at Random House. I worked for a fiction and a nonfiction editor at the same time. So I was on a real bookish path from the very start. Always wanted to be a writer. Always knew after college I would move to New York and do the whole publishing thing, which I in fact did. And I was lucky and successful. I had a career as a writer. I worked at magazines. I did all kinds of things. And, I was being published by Big 5 publishers, the whole 9 yards. But I was what's considered a midlist writer, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's kind of purgatory. There's a debut author with all the shiny excitement of, a big career in front of you, maybe, and all the hope, perhaps, and maybe a big marketing push. And then there's the bestseller or, big seller category. And then there's this giant thing in the middle, which is the midlist. And it's a terrible place to be because you're sort of nowhere. And so I was, from the outside, it looked great. Like I had a 2-book deal at Penguin. They offered me a 3-book deal. It sort of looked like the dream, but they were offering me the same advance for each of those 3 books. And when my agent and I talked about it, it was like, well, that's basically locking yourself into a job for 3 years with no advancement, right? With no hope of doing any better.
Of promotion.
Right. And if you're in the midlist and they're not paying you a lot, they're not putting a lot of muscle behind the books. And I made this huge effort to break out of the midlist, and that's a different story. But while this was all happening, which it being what I would say the fizzling of my career as a writer, I mean, I could have kept doing it, but it just didn't seem viable to me. While that was all happening, I had been teaching at the UCLA Writers Program, which is the largest adult education writers program in the country. And I was teaching memoir. I was teaching all different formats. So intensive week, 4-day long studio type things, 10-week writing program things. And so I was experiencing the incredible frustration of writers trying to break into the business and just trying to get somebody to have eyes on their page. And in the traditional publishing model, which we no longer have in this country, that you wanted to get a publisher because that was the only way to get books into the hands of readers, for one thing. But it was also the only way to get the kind of nurturing and support that most writers need to go from idea to book. And so I had experienced that my own self as a writer. And then I was seeing this frustration of people trying to get their work together. And I just was thinking, there's got to be a better way. And one of my colleagues actually asked, so I have a very strategic way of looking at the creative process. And when I was teaching, that became very apparent that I was different from the craft-based method of teaching writing. I had processes and strategies, and I was very market focused. I was teaching as if everybody wanted a traditional publishing deal. I was not the person you would come to when you were just trying to find your voice or find your way. There are people that are very good at that, but that was not what I was doing. So this colleague had gotten wind of how I teach and what I was doing. And she asked if I would help her write a book from zero all the way to getting a deal. She had a fabulous idea. She just didn't know what to do with it. And so I agreed, and we did that. And I was forming a system while I was helping her. And she ended up getting a 2-book deal at Random House. And her name's Lisa Cron, and her first book is called Wired for Story. And she became, a star in the writing world. She had a whole new career as a speaker and a thought leader, and somebody who was invited to podcasts and to guest blog and, the whole thing. And as a result of that, I had people lined up to work with me. And that's how I became a book coach.
So you kind of fell into it a bit.
I did. I fell into it for sure. And it was one of those situations where you recognize I've been trying so hard on the writing side and kind of knocking my head against the wall. And then this thing did sort of fall into my lap, and you recognize, oh, this is easy. Like, this is like breathing to me. And this other thing is a struggle. I'm going to go for the easy thing. Plus the easy thing is going to make me more money. And that was appealing to me. And so it used all my talents. It was exciting. I was good at it. I think I was a good writer, no doubt, but I'm a better book coach. And so I pivoted in that direction, and I did leave writing behind and find, I love the creative process. I love studying it. I, like you, read all the books and about all the things of creativity, entrepreneurship, all the way that people make things and the roadblocks that they have, and even what calls them to do that, what calls somebody to make a thing, and then the processes that you go through to do that. And so I consider myself a student of the creative process, and that's what I'm immersed in as a book coach. And as a person who runs a company that trains book coaches, I'm teaching others how to think like that as well, and how to do that as well.
So how did that leap happen from being a book coach, having a line of people, helping people, to saying, I'm going to train other people to do this too?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because I mean, there's two things. There's the traditional, typical entrepreneur thing where I was selling time for money, and there's a limit to that, as we all know. And I was approaching that limit and feeling the constraints of that there's only so many hours in a day. And I kept trying to solve the problem by raising my rates, and it didn't solve the problem. And so that was happening. And around that same time, I gave a talk at the UCLA Center for Entrepreneurial Studies, which is part of their MBA program. And there was a young instructor in that program who was in the audience. And I was talking to the entrepreneurs. This was, I mean, gosh, at this point, this was maybe eight or 10 or so years ago. And so it was not a super common thing for everybody to think that they could publish, a book, that you didn't need a traditional publishing deal, or you didn't need to be a writer, that's air quotes, to do it. So I was talking to these entrepreneurs about the fact that they actually have more of the skills that a writer needs to succeed in today's marketplace than somebody who comes at it from considering themselves a writer. That, the world has changed, and writers really need to know how to even look at a marketplace, how to think about an ideal customer, how to figure out how to reach that customer. Writers have to do that now. So I was giving this talk to them and talking about my systems and processes and how they could adopt those and use them. And so this guy who was in the audience came up after me and said, it's really unusual to have someone with the creative, to come from that creative side and to have the process side. You could scale what you're doing. I didn't even know what that word meant. I was just like, what does that mean? And he was very relentless in pursuing me about this idea, and finally convinced me that it was viable, that it was a viable business idea. I didn't even know what that meant, but I had some initial reservations for sure. And coming from what I knew from writing and publishing, but he was coming from this other side. So long story short, we formed a partnership and launched Author Accelerator. And we originally launched it to serve writers. And our idea was that we were going to hire and train people to coach them. And we were going to have a system and a process to do that. And that is, in fact, what we did. And we built that company up to almost $1 million in revenue when we realized that it was a faulty model for a lot of different reasons. And we axed it at the end of 2018 and decided that what we had really built was a book coach training program. So we decided to focus on the training the coaches themselves. And so that's what we pivoted to.
So you were training people to be book coaches, but then they worked for you. They were part of your business and you were
Correct.
hiring them out, so to speak. But then you had all that management issue. Was that the problem with
Huge.
the model, or what was the model problem?
There were a couple of problems, but yeah, huge administrative costs to handle all the writers, to handle all the infrastructure, all of that. But there was also some leaks in the system where we were training people and then they were going out to find their own clients, or people were coming to them, or they were searching our database for the people we were training. And so it felt like we were bleeding a little, bleeding opportunity, and it felt anxious making. And the type
you were kind of developing your own competition.
Exactly. And I mean, there were a lot of things when we really step back and look at it, and it was similar to the story I told about how I became a book coach in the first place. When we stepped back and we looked at it, we realized that what we had really built was this very robust training program, and we had incredibly high standards, and we had a whole protocol and process for getting people to do this work and do it well. And I didn't even realize we had a list of 120 people wanting to work for us, wanting to even go through our test. We had a test process that you had to go through to even begin to talk to us about working for us. And I had done that just to kind of keep people away and keep them at bay. And like, if you can pass my test, I'll talk to you. It was a hard test. And we had, without doing anything, 120 people wanting to do that. And so I thought, well, let's make that a business. And so that's what we're doing now is really focusing on training. We have a fiction training program, a nonfiction training program, and then we teach people to run their business. So a business of book coaching training program.
That's great. So can you tell us some of the success stories that have come out of that program?
Oh yeah. It's, it's been a little slow. It takes a long time for people to learn. It takes them about 6 to 9 months to go through the program. And the reason it's so long is because they have to work with clients. So in order to get certified, they have to submit their work with clients. They have to submit their editorial work on the page, and also a video of them actually coaching. And there's 3 different practicums that they have to do that for. So it takes a while to do that work and get through it. But some of the success stories that are coming out of it, there's so many ways that we could define success and look at them. But for me, some of the most exciting successes are people who have come from other industries and pivoted into this one. So we have a lot of people who have PhDs, for example, and especially in the last year, you and I are talking towards the end here of 2020, the world turned upside down. For academia, especially, just a really difficult time. A lot, no jobs available anywhere, for one thing. And the way they do their work and deliver their work totally turned upside down. And so a lot of frustrated academics have come to us and realized that they can turn their expertise into something that they can control and that they can use on their own. So that to me is just a huge success that we offer an opportunity for people to take their expertise and be in control of it. A similar success story is we have quite a lot of young mothers who were stuck at home with their kids and needing to work and frustrated with the way their work life was going. And so they took this up in order to have work that they could, again, control. Their control is more day-to-day control they're looking for, I would say. So we have those kinds of successes for sure that I really consider a mark of what we're doing. And some of our pioneer book coaches are now out there making six figures their own selves with their businesses. And some of those people, it's still a side gig for them because they're writers first and foremost. We have a lot of people who are writers. And the thing about being a writer is, which is what I experienced my own self, it's incredibly unstable. The income is incredibly variable. You might have a book come out one year and then not have a book come out for 3 more years. Or you might, there's just so many different ways. If writing is your primary income, there's so many ups and downs, and adding book coaching to that income stream allows them to stabilize that. So we have writers who are doing really well in their writing career. And by the metrics of what they're earning as a book coach, you wouldn't say it was wildly successful, but for them, it's perfect. It's filling that gap. It's creating that steady stream. So that's a huge success. And I would just say primarily the success that I consider the highest is I don't know of any other business that's doing what we're doing. And there are other businesses that train in a specific method of writing. Perhaps it's writing a novel, and there's a specific method for doing that. And I have specific methods that I teach in my program, but I also teach people how to use all the tools to help writers and how to deploy those tools and how to really run the business is what we're teaching. So our Author Accelerator certified coaches might be out there teaching my methods, but they're also teaching other people's methods, and they're weaving them together. They're doing whatever's best for the writer. So for me, the biggest success is I feel like we're moving the needle in how writing is taught, and in how this industry is, we're building an industry and changing that. And I think that's just super exciting, and I'm really proud of it.
So how much experience do the people typically have when they come to you? I mean, are these all pro authors that have published a bunch of books and they've got a ton of experience, or are there people with less experience who can become book coaches and do a great job?
It's both. I mean, and that's a great question that I get a lot. Do I have to have an English degree? Do I have to have an MFA? Do I have to have an agent? Do I have to have been published? Do I have to be a bestseller to be a book coach? And this is where I kind of can get up on my soapbox, because in other realms, like let's say sports, we all know what a coach is in sports. And we all know that the best athletes and teams have coaches. We all know that it's a profession to be a coach. And we also know that while there are, in fact, some coaches in sports who excelled at the sport, there are others who didn't. And there are others who didn't get nearly as far as the people they're coaching. And one of my favorite examples of this is Serena Williams, who works with a coach who I don't believe ever played in a professional major tournament, and he's coaching one of the world's top tennis players. So why, when it comes to something like sports, do we not say, well, you can't coach somebody if you haven't won the US Open? You can't coach a US Open winner. It's ridiculous, because coaching is a different skill. It requires a different set of tools. It requires a different temperament. There are some people who can be excellent at coaching and not able to pull off, doing the work itself, or not interested in doing the work itself, or whatever the reason might be. So that's part of what I'm trying to change, is to get people to see that just because somebody's a good writer doesn't mean that they're going to be a good coach. And in fact, we have this weird thing in publishing where if somebody becomes famous, we automatically turn to them to learn how they did it. And, you can go to famous writer workshops in exotic places and work with writers who have done really well. And I'm not going to name names because that doesn't do anybody any good. But I see a lot of people coming from those types of programs who have done those types of programs. And some of the feedback that they've gotten is quite damaging. Some of it is confusing. What good does it do? For example, here's one that I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here because I don't even know if he teaches writing, but the writer Harlan Coben, who's a best-selling mystery writer, once in a speech said that his process is, he'll sit down and he'll write, I think it was like 50 pages in a day. Like it was just some insane thing that a normal person just is never going to be able to do. And I probably got those numbers wrong, but the spirit of it is right, is that, you hear him say that in a talk and you sort of, as a writer, you're sort of just going to deflate because it's like, I can't do that. I can't even write 2 pages in that period of time or whatever the thing is. And, so then you sort of carry this thing like, oh, I guess I can't be a writer, or maybe I'm not any good, or maybe I won't be as good as he is, or, reach the level he has. But that works for him because it works for him, So what a coach is going to do is figure out what works for you and what are you doing that is perhaps not effective, or how can we get a process together that's going to take advantage of what you're bringing to this. And so the way I would characterize it is that the Harlan Coben thing that I just mentioned is like an outside in method of learning something, like looking at the structure and reverse engineering. Oh, I'll do that and then I'll be successful too. And book coaching is an inside out method. It's let's draw out your story. Let's draw out your idea. Let's look at the way you live your life and build habits that are going to work for you. Let's give you accountability and support and feedback so that you can do your best work. So it's a really different way of looking at it. So that's just a very long way. I told you I was going to get up on my soapbox. A very long way of saying that if somebody has the right temperament and heart and desire to be a book coach, you can learn how to do it.
You mentioned that some coaches will coach nonfiction, some coaches coach fiction. And I assume that the coaches who do fiction have experience with writing fiction and the nonfiction coaches have experience writing nonfiction. But are there other differences that you've noticed between that coaches and just the way that they see things or that they approach things when they're coaching their students?
Yeah. What's interesting about the difference between fiction and nonfiction is they're actually far more similar than people would imagine. And the reason for that is that what underlies both things. So I coach both. I coach in all genres myself. I still do one-on-one coaching, and there's a lot of reasons why I still do it. I love it for one thing. It pays well for another, and I like practicing the thing that I'm teaching so that I can really teach people. I'm not just blah blah blah. Like I'm living it as well. So I coach fiction, everything from middle grade to, all different genres. And I coach memoir and I coach nonfiction of all kinds. So I coach all of it and I approach all of it the same way. And I teach all of it the same way. And the reason for that is that underlying all of it is some fundamental principles of narrative design. So fundamental principles of how writing works to engage a reader. There's a logic. So even in fiction, there's like a drivetrain, if you will, or an engine underneath it that's pulling it all forward, and that you've got to know what that is in order to do it. And so as a coach, when I'm approaching writing and what I'm teaching on both fiction and nonfiction sides is pattern recognition. It's what is this writer doing? What do writers typically do when you see this problem? So the problem might be, so again, this is the craft-based way of looking at things. You might say the middle of this drags, or you might say the ending wasn't satisfying. And instead of just, well, you learn the craft piece, you learn how to fix that. But as a coach, what you learn is how do you identify that? How do you really quickly identify that? so that you're not slogging through, let's say you've got a 300-page manuscript. I can review a 300-page manuscript extremely quickly because I'm looking for the things that people typically get wrong. And so those underlying logic analysis things are on both. It doesn't matter what genre you're coaching. So what's wrong in the writing tends to be similar. And then not what's wrong, I would not say it that way, but what the writers are struggling with also tends to be very similar. At the level of coaching that I do, I am largely working with people on their writer's identity, on claiming their voice, claiming their messaging, what's their brand doing, what do they want to be in the world. It's quite like the work you're doing. How am I going to become a thought leader? What's the speech that I'm going to give when this book comes out? How is that going to all align and fit together? So you're really working with the writer as how they're going to live in the world, and how this book is going to be a manifestation of how they're going to live in the world. And it's actually precisely the same on the fiction side. And you wouldn't think that, or you wouldn't know that, or, so when in a perfect world, which it is not, every single coach that I trained would be trained in both fiction and nonfiction. So the reason for that is fiction writers who are not doing as well as they want to do, usually what they're getting wrong is they're missing the logic. They're missing the connection that drives from one scene to next to the other, that underlying linkage that's going to pull the reader through. And they just need to learn how to do that logic piece. And on the nonfiction side, what people tend to get wrong, I work with a lot of professionals. So they're CEOs, they're lawyers, they're PR professionals, communications folks, speakers, leaders, that kind of thing. And there's such in the world of business and the world of writing, they tend to squeeze the emotion out of everything. So these people know how to write very logical, analytical arguments that can progress really beautifully, but they're just bloodless. They're just like boring to read, and
the heart's missing.
Yeah, they don't pull the writer. They're not the kind of book that you go like, oh, you got to read this to your friend. They're the kind of book that you sort of consume and then forget, or you look at it on yourself and you think, wait, what was that book? There's just no there, even if the ideas are really great. And so what those writers need to learn how to do is find their voice. What does that mean? Strangely enough, I find the more accomplished a person is in their field of expertise, the more they struggle with what I would call authority, with actually claiming that authority on the page. There's this strange what sits with expertise is often this doubt about how to speak and how to claim that authority, and can I really say that thing, and well, this other person said that thing already, or that type of thing. So they're really working with voice, with emotion, and those are the things you typically associate with fiction. So the tools, a really good book coach is going to have all those tools. So if I'm coaching a nonfiction writer who's got a bloodless thing, I'm actually drawing on all the tools of fiction to help them. And vice versa. If I've got a fiction writer who doesn't have the underlying logic, I'm using a lot of the tools from the nonfiction side. So that's a long way of saying that there's a lot of overlap in my training courses between fiction and nonfiction. I approach it in a very similar way. And there is a lot of overlap, but at a certain point, you kind of need both. If you're going to, I don't know. That's why I was saying in a perfect world, everyone would do both, but someday.
I love that. So I think most writers would say that a book coach is something that would be nice to have. I mean, we'd all like to have a book coach, but how does an author know when they need a book coach?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there are a lot of situations in which you would not need one. So those situations would be perhaps you've already written a book. Perhaps you write a lot in your life already. perhaps you wrote in college, you're really comfortable with, you have an idea, you know how to structure it, you know how to make it work, and you're getting the results that you want. That means either you've landed an agent in a book deal, if that's what you want. You've self-published or worked with a hybrid publisher to get it into the hands of readers, if that's what you want. There's so many paths to publishing now. So if you've found success in any, however you define it, you don't need anybody, right? You're good. If you are struggling in any way where you're not sure, you're frustrated, maybe you're spending a lot of time. I think people waste a lot of time and money when they're learning how to write, or they're learning about writing a book because they're doing it piecemeal. I'm going to go to this conference for 3 days. I'm going to take this online workshop for, a couple hours. I'm going to learn about this or that. Like they're looking at all the tactics of writing a book and trying to piece together a cohesive whole. And so if there's a level of frustration, or overwhelm about that, like, I don't know where to start, I don't know what to do, what's the difference, like what's a hybrid publisher, what's self-publishing, how does the money flow, like, if it's actually a incredibly fast changing business, as you know. And not that a book coach is going to have all the answers, but probably they're going to have more answers than somebody who's never been in this industry is going to have. So if they're frustrated or overwhelmed, that might be a time to seek help. And then finally, the thing that I would say is that I believe if you want to write a book that has an impact, that has a chance of having an impact, you've got to be willing to invest. It's no different from bringing any other product into the world. No, you would never start a business making some widget or, selling anything without looking at that business model, without looking at your goals, without looking at who's my audience, who's my competition. No, like, it'd be insane. You would never do that. So the same is true for writing a book, that when you're willing to really invest in your own success, when you're ready to say, I really want to do this, and I really want to do this right, and I don't want to mess around, and I want expert guidance, that might be a time to seek coaching help. So I would say frustration, overwhelm, and deep desire to commit are the three levers that, or crossroads, I guess you would say, that if you're at those, you probably would want to seek help.
What I like that you're saying here is that it's not just the writing process. There are so many other things around the process of getting a book out there, and a book coach can help you with these other steps as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's just like anything else where, I'm a big fan in investing in my own self. And from time to time, I like to go out and spend at the level that I'm charging. So, what I'm asking people to pay to invest in me, I like to pay similar amount for another professional to help me in my growth. So I seek out business coaches and have done that every year for the past couple years, just depending on what I'm trying to learn, or, it's the whole growth mindset thing. And I know for sure, this is what I know for sure, that when I put a lot of money down, I'm going to work way harder than if I didn't put that money down. And I think in some ways, putting the money down is the thing that makes you actually do the work and stop procrastinating and stop putting it off and stop saying, well, someday. Just the knowledge that I'm going to be meeting with this person. Like, I'm literally right now about 2 weeks out from meeting with a person I'm paid quite a lot of money to work with. And I've just been scrambling to take the time and make the space to maximize that time that I'm going to be spending. So it's that sort of mindset that I think you would approach a book coach, with.
So speaking of paying out money, I'm sure some people are listening to this and saying, hey, I want a book coach, but how much does this cost? And how do you engage? I mean, can you hire a book coach for one time to come in and give you some advice? Is it a 12-month thing? Am I shelling out $5,000 a month or $500 a month? Can you educate us a little bit about that landscape and the different options?
Yeah. So the answer to all that is yes to anything. You can find any sort of package, any sort of price point that you feel you want. So I think if somebody is thinking, I have a small budget to spend, and where should I best spend it? I would say spend it at the start of your project. Get some book coaching help in the very beginning, and that's going to help you lay a strong foundation and help you really know that you're on the right path. You could, for example, work with someone for, let's just say, a month with a deadline every week, and maybe that month is going to cost you anywhere from, I'm just trying to think of actual packages I know some of our book coaches are offering. I think that month could cost you anywhere from $500 to $18,000. So, it would depend.
That's a bit of a range.
Right? What's going to happen in that month? So I'm the 18,000. So I have a package that's a 4-week, $18,000 package. And it is like, clear your calendar, get ready to do some serious hard work. You're probably going to cry. Like it's that kind of intensity. And we meet like the first week of that 4-month period. We meet every day. So, I'm in it with you. I'm pushing you. I'm on you. It's like there is no backing off from that, intense thing. And the price point is, equals what the value of having somebody devoted to you like that. You don't have to wait for feedback. You're going to get feedback from me every single day. That's why it costs that much. But you can, so yeah, there's a huge range, and it depends on what are you looking for. Are you looking for a strategy conversation about how to look at the different publishing paths and how to think about how long this project is going to take and sketch that all out? That's one thing. Are you looking for intensive line by line feedback on your work every week or every other week? That's another thing. There's a pretty typical package that our coaches will present, which is a finish your draft kind of package. So that's going to be roughly, call it 6 months. You're probably going to have deadlines 2 times a month. You're probably going to be turning in 20 to 30 pages on those deadlines. And you're going to be paying somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 to $6,000 for that feedback. And that price range is going to depend on the experience of the coach, the success that the coach has already experienced out in the world, and the level of feedback that they're going to be giving you. So you kind of have to know what you want, and what you're looking for. And so it's being honest with yourself about that. What do I really need? What am I willing to accept in terms of feedback?
And in addition to doing book coaching, you still help people to find book coaches if they come to you looking. Is that right?
Yes. Author Accelerator has a free match program. So we will match writers with our book coaches at no cost. And we do that. We have a person, her name's Diana. This is not an algorithm. This is a person, and she knows our book coaches. She knows their skills and talents, their temperament, their price point, if they're open or not. And so we have a form that you fill out, and we'll make that match at no charge to the writer. And then the writer can approach an agent who's been vetted for them and decide if that's a good fit for them. And then the coach will give us a referral fee, back to us for that. So we do offer that. I've kind of put a stake in the ground that I don't want Author Accelerator to be a marketplace. I don't want it to be a place where you can just come and scroll through a bunch of profiles and pick a book coach. And the reason for that is I'm just adamantly opposed to the race to the bottom pricing model that so many people that work in the creative fields and the arts and the service industries seem to accept. I'm so not about that. I think what our coaches are offering is enormously valuable. It's not just a transactional thing, it's a transformative thing. And so I don't want people coming and, comparing or, saying, oh, who's the cheapest, or making their decision based on it's funny, I'm actually in the middle of reading. Have you read Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers?
I haven't yet. I'm looking forward to reading it. I love Malcolm Gladwell, though.
Yeah, I am the same way. I'm a little slow to this one as well, but I just started reading it, and it's fascinating because it's about that idea of that we're actually really bad at judging people, that we think we're really good at it. And he's, Malcolm Gladwell, he's got some really amazing case studies from the CIA, from the judges administering bail, and like in that situation, a computer did a way better job of determining a person's likelihood to commit a crime than the judge who was right in front of that person did. So it's this idea that we're actually quite bad at judging people. And I didn't know that that's part of the reason why I've been so resistant to do that with my business. But reading Malcolm Gladwell, I'm like, that's why, because I don't think we're actually really good at deciding who's going to be good for us when we're faced with this marketplace of people. So I digress, but
No, this is interesting. So hiring the cheapest coach out there might be a mistake that an author would make hiring a book coach. Are there other common mistakes that authors make when they're working with a coach?
Yeah. The stupidest waste of money is to come to a coach and then fight them on everything they say. And it's surprising how often that happens. And that's because people haven't done the work of determining what they're really looking for. Because if they knew what they were really looking for, in that case, it would be, I'm looking for validation. I'm looking for somebody to give me the green light that I should go ahead and publish this. I'm looking for somebody to tell me I'm not going to embarrass myself, right? So they're looking for something different than actually getting feedback. So if you're not open to getting feedback, don't go buy it. Like, that's just a stupid waste of time.
So it requires some humility to work with a book coach.
Totally. And also, if you want someone to write it for you, that's a different thing. That's a ghostwriter. That's a super valid, option for a lot of people. And if they just really don't want to be bothered, if they would rather have someone actually do the heavy lifting on the words, if they if that's just not their thing, then they need a ghostwriter. So it's really the mistakes that people make would be all in the bucket of not knowing what they're really looking for. If somebody doesn't understand the different kinds of editing, a book coach is in the realm of a developmental editor. They're not a copy editor, which is somebody who goes in and does line by line copy cleanup, or a proofreader who finds the commas and make sure that the style is correct. Writers need all of those things, but you don't need a proofreader before you use a developmental editor. So if you don't know what you're looking for and you approach that book coach, it's I think it's always going to be a waste of money. So it's really knowing what you need, and that goes to knowing what your goal is for the book. There's a million reasons to write a book. You could write a book because you want to capture your family legacy for your family. That's a great idea. Do it. I worked with a guy a couple years ago who ran a large financial services firm in the Midwest, and he was coming towards the end of his career and wanted to capture what he knew for the recruits coming into his company. And so I helped him write a book. He had no intention of, having that book be in a Barnes and Noble in another state. He knew exactly what he wanted. He knew exactly, how to get what he wanted. And we did that. So, that's another way of publishing a book. I'm working right now with a speaker who has a really robust speaking career that came to a grinding halt in 2020. And she wants to have a book to sell in the back of the room because you're leaving money on the table. People are asking her all the time, can I buy your book? She doesn't have it. So, she knows exactly what her goal is. And again, her goal is not necessarily agent, traditional publisher. There's so many different ways that a book can be useful in the world to somebody. I'm also working with the CEO of a company who's got a big book deal at a big publisher and, wants a big book. That's unabashedly what her goal is to be on the shelf next to, I don't want to say too much about it, but next to X, Y, and Z book. And, so you really have to know what your goal is. And I would say that, excuse me, if your goal is vague and fuzzy or super ego driven, like I want to be on the New York Times bestseller list and have Oprah pick me for her book club.
And I want it all for $500.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you can't control those outcomes, so it's like knowing what you want and then knowing what you can control. So a lot of what I do is telling people, like, kind of breaking their bubble. Like, if anybody comes to me and says, well, wow, you're expensive and what's ROI for working with you? I'm going to have a serious conversation with that person about what an ROI of a book is, because there's not a lot of people that make a lot of money on a book. It's usually leads to something else or sets the groundwork for something else. On the fiction side, it's even worse. The number of people that can actually make a living writing fiction is very, very, very low. So you have to know, why am I doing this? What am I willing to invest in it? Monetarily, time-wise, my heart, all those things. So, it's really getting your head around what you want. So it's know what you want, know what your goals are. That's the best way to approach the start of any book.
Perfect. So, not knowing that much about book coaching myself, are there any questions about book coaching that I should have asked, but I haven't?
One question that frequently people ask is, well, there's different permutations of it, but one would be, how do I know they're not going to steal my idea? Another side of that question would be, how do I know they're not going to just take it over and write it for me? So some version of the idea that working with someone is going to make you lose your thing. So we get a lot of that nervousness around that. And the answer to all those questions is the same, which is that, first of all, nobody owns an idea, and what they own is the execution of that idea. So just because you want to write about climate change and the role of, trucking, the trucking industry on climate change, 12 other people could write about that, and you can't stop them. And it also won't matter, because what you're going to write is necessarily going to be unique, because everybody brings different things to it. And if the time is right for books on trucking and climate change, the marketplace will reward all of it, because people who want to read one such book probably want to read all the books. It's just like looking you in your bookshelf, like you buy all the books. People who love books buy all the books. So maybe they're going to buy 5 of those books on climate change and trucking. So, it's realizing that ideas are cheap and it's all in the execution. And then it's also realizing, so people can't steal your idea. It doesn't work like that. And then the idea is somebody going to take it over and make it their own. I think the way to make sure that doesn't happen is to find the kind of coach or editor whose philosophy states what they do and states how they work and states what their practices are like, and then also in whatever discovery process you have with them to ask those questions. How heavily do you edit? When you talk about line editing, what does that look like? How many comments could I expect, for example, on a page or 300? What does your editorial letter look like? Just asking questions about how they work and what their process is like and what they can expect. And if you hear something that doesn't seem like what you want, then, go the other way. So those are the kinds of questions I think, people often have, but they haven't articulated.
Well, Jennie, thank you so much for spending time with us here today to educate us more about book coaching and what a book coach is and what a book coach can do.
You're welcome.
If people want to reach out to you, what's the best place for them to find you?
They can find me at jennienash.com, which is JENNIE. And that's all my social media is the same. And if they're interested in book coaching, I have a book called Read Books All Day and Get Paid for It, which is available on...
It sounds like a dream come true.
on Amazon. And if they're interested in learning more specifics about being a book coach, bookcoaches.com/ABC has a series of 6 videos where I walk people through what book coaching is, who tends to be good at it, how you can make money. They're 30 minutes each. So you'll get very tired of seeing me talk about it, but they're there, they're free. So that's bookcoaches.com/ABC.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being with us here today on the Published Author Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.